Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. Welcome to It's Time for More Injury Funding, the podcast for all who want to learn about legal funding and its significance in the personal injury, tracking law, workers' compensation, medical malpractice, dog bites, and many other types of law practice domains. I'm your host, Laura, founder and CEO of More Injury Funding, the legal funding counselors with passion for law, medicine, legal funding, and heart for all suffering individuals. More Injury Funding is a sponsor, member, associate, board member, or business partner of this podcast, Georgia Trial Lawyers Association, Academy of Truck Accident Attorneys, Sandy Springs Bar Association, Georgia Association for Women Lawyers, GOLD for short, Georgia Association of Paralegals, Atlanta Legal Aid Society, State Bar of Georgia, St. Andrew Rowing Club, and Georgia Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. In today's episode, I have a special guest, Brooke Lively, CEO and founder of Cathedral Capital, a team of CFOs and profitability strategists who help entrepreneurs turn their businesses into profitable companies. After earning her MBA, Brooke built a seven-figure company in under 2 years. As a chartered financial analyst, she and her team work with Hall of Famers Incorporated 5,000 businesses, CEOs, and small business owners. She has been named a top 25 woman to watch in 2016 to 2020. The Diversity Journal Women Worth Watching, and to Fort Worth's 2016 CFOs of the Year. She is a highly regarded speaker and author of several books. Today, we will dive deep into the topic of navigating law firm future, how lawyers can exit on top. At the end of our episode, I prepared a fun pop-up question for our guests, so stay tuned in. Welcome to Time for More Injury Funding podcast, Brooke.
Hey, thanks, Laura. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Can you tell us about your expertise in law firm growth management, creative problem solving, and profitability strategy? What is your success model based on?
So it's based on a couple of things. Let me first tell you how we got started. Um, I, well, just by weird circumstances, ended up running my family's law firm. And I had hired someone to help with sales and marketing. And his clients started coming to me and saying, "Can you do for us what you do for your family?" And that was when I started to understand that lawyers weren't running their businesses based on data. And that was when I opened CathCap. And we really were built as a CFO company. 85% of the US economy is based on small businesses. And small businesses don't have access to that strategic financial advice that you get from a CFO. So I wanted to give that to people. And so I took everything that I learned in my MBA, everything I learned while I was becoming a chartered financial analyst, and everything I learned running my family's firm. And now everything that I and the rest of my team has learned running a couple of hundred law firms. We're working with a couple of hundred law firms. And so we really look at firms, and there are a few things that we know. And the biggest one is we believe in running a law firm on the rule of thirds. So 1/3 of revenue goes to the people doing the work. 1/3 goes to operating expenses, and 1/3 goes to profit. Now, you work mostly with personal injury. So here's a little something interesting. PI can actually get better margins for that. We can push profit up over 40, 45, closer to 50%. So I got to tell you, PI is a great place to be.
So, Brooke, very recently in March or April of 2024, you published a book that hit the Amazon bestsellers list called Exit on Top, about how to sell a law firm to the right person at the right time for the right price. Why is that a firm that is an attractive acquisition is the firm that you want to own now?
So I did write a book, Exit on Top. You want to own this firm. You want to own an attractive acquisition, a firm that somebody wants to buy, because really for three reasons. One, it throws off a lot of cash. It has happy employees and happy clients. And the third is the amount of pressure or the demands it puts on the owner. it doesn't put that many demands on the owner. So it lets the owner do what it is that they love, whether that's being in court or working on marketing, spending the time in another business, or even just spending time with their family.
Mhm, mhm. So when an attorney sells his or her firm, they're going to get anywhere from 2.5, probably to 4% of their total compensation. This is not a huge, sexy exit number. Why attorneys need to know that?
So yeah, so let's dig into that 2.5 to 4x. The 2.5 to 4x really depends on how automated your firm is and how much it needs you as the owner. If you are the one whose name is on the firm and it's your image and you're doing all the sales calls and you're doing 90% of the work and you're doing all the billing, like literally sending the bills out, and you're calling and getting the collections and you're opening the mail. And like, if it's all you, yeah, you're down there at the 2.5, maybe even under.
Mhm, mhm,
Your firm doesn't have a lot of value.
mhm,
If your firm has a name that is not related to your name. So, you know, divorce is us or the personal injury law firm. If it doesn't have your image, so it can be easily transferred to somebody else. If you have a team of professional intake people, if you have staff that is trained to do the work and you've got procedures on how to do that work, if everything is automated within your firm, if your firm is profitable, and if it doesn't take a lot of your time, if it's not necessary for you in particular to be there,
mhm, mhm,
then you're going to be closer to that 4x. And when I say total compensation, the word that you're going to hear, or the initials that you're going to hear, are SDE. So sellers discretionary earnings. And SDE is any salary you get. So a lot of law firms, the owners have taken an S corp election. So you are required by law to take a reasonable salary. IRS has never told us what reasonable is, but you know, a reasonable salary. Okay. So you've got your salary. You've got any draws you take, any profit you leave in the company at the end of the year. And then, of course, there are all those personal expenses that you run through the firm. Laura, you know the ones I'm talking about, right?
mhm,
Like, everybody does it. It is totally fine that you do it. I don't care. That is between you and your CPA and the IRS.
mhm,
But you do want to find those if you're going to sell, because it increases your SDE. It increases your seller's discretionary earnings, your total compensation, which increases the price that you get.
mhm.
So I've been talking to a ton of attorneys recently, and I happened to be with a group, and there were a lot of M&A attorneys. And there was this one guy from Philadelphia, and he's like, all right, I want to start another firm. And then I want to sell it to private equity. I'm like, okay, so we're going to have to do an SBE, you know, which is how you set up a law firm, a non-attorney law firm in Arizona. We start doing this, and then I get to the 2.5 to 4x, and he's like, "That's all I'll get." And like his whole face fell because he does all these deals all the time with like SaaS companies, and they're getting, you know, 20 times revenue. I'm like, yeah. No. Law firms aren't sexy. And so I think as we're talking about exiting, we're talking about selling your law firm. There are these attorneys that think they're going to take their $2 million law firm revenue of $2 million, and they're going to sell it for 10 or $15 million in, you know, 5, 6, 7 years when they retire. And I just want people to know that that's not realistic. You're going to get somewhere between 2.5 and 4 times what you earn in an average year. So if you haven't saved any money for retirement, this is not going to bail you out. And I just want people to know that. And I want people to go in and get their firm ready to acquire now for the reasons I just said. Mainly that first one, it throws off a lot of cash. Let's go ahead and get the firm ready to acquire so that it throws off all that cash so that hopefully you do live below your means and you can take that cash and put it away because selling your firm is not going to be the giant cash out that a lot of attorneys think that it could be.
Mm-hmm. So based on this information you just shared with us, Brooke, attorney considering selling his or her law firm really should get it ready to sell now and get all that money. Tell us about it.
Yeah, the earlier you're ready to sell, the better. Um, it's, there's a great book out there. It's called Built to Sell. And everything we do, we should be building with the intention to sell. An attractive acquisition, like I said, throws off cash, has happy clients, happy employees, and doesn't take a lot of your time. So you're freed up to do the things that you really love to do. Like, why don't you want to own that law firm as opposed to one where you're struggling? So let's go ahead and do the hard work now. In addition to that, it takes 3 to 5 years to get a law firm ready to sell because generally you wake up one morning and you can't say, I'm going to sell today because you have to have 3 years of clean financials that show good profits. And if you don't have those 3 years of, really profitable firm, you got to work for a few years to become profitable. And then you have to run it for 3 years profitably. Okay, so let's say it takes you 2 or 3 years to get to the rule of thirds so that you're getting 1/3 profit. Okay, now you have to run it for 3 years. So now we're 5 years into this project. Now you can put it on the market. You put the firm on the market. Let's say you find a buyer pretty quickly in 6 months. It's going to take at least 6 months for the deal to close. Okay, so we were at what? 5, 6 years? So now we're at 6 or 7 years. And I hate to tell you, buying a law firm is not like buying a house. You don't go sign all the papers, get handed a check, and walk off. There's usually a transition period of 1 to 2 years. So we were at 7 or 8 years. With transition, we're now at 8 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm. That totally makes sense. Mm-hmm.
So, like, do it now, get it out of the way,
Mm-hmm.
and then, ride that cash cow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Well, so your book Exit on Top is not only useful to people selling, acquisition is a great growth strategy for law firms. How so?
There are a ton of different reasons to buy a law firm. And let's just talk about some of them. I had a client in El Paso, and we were headed down to Mexico for a mastermind. And we're in the Dallas airport, and we're about to board. And she's like, "Oh, Brooke, I'm going to buy another firm." I'm like, "Okay, great. How'd you find it?" She's like, "Oh, I was cruising around on the internet on a Sunday afternoon a couple of weeks ago, and I found it." And they called us to board, and we got on the airplane, and she was sitting like 3 rows in front of me. So I had to suffer the entire way to Mexico, knowing that she's buying some law firm that she found on the stinking internet. I was like panicked.
Mm-hmm.
Well, turns out I knew the broker, and I actually knew the law firm she was going to buy. So it was all good. But when we got off the plane, I'm like, "Okay, tell me about this firm." She's like, "Well, it's in Atlanta." I'm like, "You live in El Paso, Texas, and you're buying a firm in Atlanta, Georgia." those are not close to each other. And she's like, no, but I want an office on the East Coast. I'm like, okay, tell me a little more about it. Well, it does a very niched type of immigration law that is very complementary to the type of immigration law that she does. And she sees a lot of synergy and referrals back and forth. I'm like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. In addition, because they are so specialized, they're one of the few firms in the country that does what they do. She was buying their talent and know-how. Nobody knows how to do that. So those are three great reasons to buy it. She wanted their location, she wanted their knowledge, and she wanted their referral relationships. Those are all huge. They're great ways to increase the size of your own firm. And if you're buying a firm, if you think about this, you're buying a firm that will be generating revenue immediately. Any good deal is going to be cash flow positive. When we start looking at that SDE, that multiple of SDE, you always keep your eye on that, the seller's discretionary earnings, because you want to make sure that even after the sale and after you're paying whatever loan you have gotten, whether it's seller financed, whether you've gotten an SBA loan, whether you've gotten a bank loan, which is not very likely, much more likely to get an SBA loan, that you, as the new buyer, the new owner, you're still getting paid something. So you got to make sure that this whole thing cash flows. Not all businesses are like that. A lot of times you buy a business and it doesn't cash flow for the first few years at all. So that's an awesome thing. So here's a business that increases your footprint and brings you money. So you can buy their cases. With a PI firm, you're very often buying their cases, their reputation. You're buying their attorneys. How hard is it to hire attorneys right now?
Tell me about it. Yes.
Hello, go buy them.
Well, that's a
Sorry,
smart model.
I own you now.
Mm-hmm.
You conveyed with the firm. So, you get their client lists, you get their referral sources, you get their name if they have built up a name. And with PI, you buy their inventory. So PI is slightly different when we value their firm. Instead of the 2.5 to 4x, which that will figure into it to some extent, we're also going to look at the value of the cases that you have in inventory, because that's really what you're selling, right? The cases that you're currently working.
Totally makes sense. So Brooke, we spoke earlier and you stated that there are 7 different parts of one's law firm and each will affect the valuation differently. Some will increase, some will decrease, and one doesn't really matter if it's a disaster. Can you please elaborate on this statement?
Yeah, it's really interesting when you go through and you think about your law firm. There are some things that are really important, and there's some things that aren't as important. You want to think about it, and let's start with the most important thing, the thing that really is going to drive everything else, and that's your financials. If you're not getting good, if you don't have a good profit margin, nothing else really matters. So financials, if we're looking at the 7, financials is the most important, and it has to be right. And it is the one that is going to swing your valuation the most from valuable to not valuable. The others are marketing. So we talked about marketing. We talked about, is it your name? Is it, Me Inc.? if it's Me Inc., the chances of you finding someone with your name that looks like you, that has a bar license in your state to come in and buy your firm, not this big. Though I did hear about an attorney on the West Coast somewhere that got disbarred for like a year, and he found somebody with the same name, got him admitted to his state, sold him the firm for a year to run it, and then sold the firm back, which I thought was a totally creative way to keep his firm
Wow.
for a
That
year.
is a genius right there.
I know, isn't it? So, marketing, the more tied to you, the more it's going to lower the value of the firm. The more it has a reputation of its own, and the more you track the metrics in it, and you can say things like, I have an actual marketing plan and it's got a feedback loop. That's going to push it up. Sales and intake. Again, do you have professionals doing your intake, or, do you have the receptionist answering the phone? That one is interesting. It is not going to move the value as much, because anyone buying your firm knows that they can come in and put in a professional sales team.
Mm-hmm.
That is not a very complicated thing to fix. So it's not going to increase your value, and it's not going to decrease your value that much. Operations, on the other hand, do you have the right reporting structure? Have you documented 80%, or have you documented processes that cover 80% of the work? Is everybody sitting in the right seat? That's important. The last thing an owner wants is to come in and have have the organizational structure a mess. And in the same way, people is important. One of the most important things you're going to look at when you're buying a law firm or when you're selling yours, is this a culture fit? Do they want the same things? But when we're also looking at people, we're like, is there a hiring process to make sure that we get the right people on the bus?
Mm-hmm.
Do we care about our employees? Is there a professional development program? So all of that will really increase the value of the firm. If you don't have any people, if your staff is a wreck, that's going to push it down. Production. This is where we actually get the work done. This is really understanding how it works. Do you understand the numbers and mechanics behind it? Do you know when you need to hire? Do you have the right ratio of attorneys to non-attorneys? Does everybody have some kind of production goal? And are they held accountable every stinking week? And do you really understand the capacity of your firm? The better you have numbers like that nailed down, the more valuable your firm, because you can go to a potential buyer and say, this is exactly how much my machine can produce, because that's what you're selling. The throughput of a machine. The machine is your law firm. The throughput is the work. So this is how many cases I can handle. This is my average case value. This is what it produces.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that in detail, really being able to prove that out, is going to give the buyer a lot of confidence in what they're buying. If you can't do that, the guy or girl who's buying, the buyer doesn't have a lot of confidence in you.
Mm-hmm.
And the last one is the one that is the one that cracks me up the most, and it's technology. So attorneys are not known for being early adopters of any technology. Until what? The 1950s, they were basically practicing law almost like they were in the 1500s. Is that fair enough, Laura?
That sounds about right.
They had given in to the typewriter.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the 70s, they said, okay, we'll take a word processor. And then in the 90s, they said, okay, 90s, 2000s, we'll do our legal research online. So getting better, but not early adopters. And there's a ton of different software out there. So anybody buying a law firm is pretty much guaranteed that there's going to be a big software project. So if your technology is a wreck and you're about to sell, it is not worth cleaning it up. Don't put any money in that. It's just not worth it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to bring the value of your firm down. That being said, if you have a long time horizon, put money into technology. Because if your CRM, whatever you're using for marketing, your practice management system, and your QuickBooks are all tied together, are all syncing up all the time, all have data that matches each other, and is all pushing that data out, it enables you to prove every claim that you are making to a seller. I mean, to the buyer.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives them confidence to pay more money.
And so, Brooke, I want to ask you some fun question. You have come up with a quiz that helps attorneys figure out which parts of their firm need attention. Tell us about this quiz, please.
Yeah, the quiz, actually, that's kind of what we just discussed. 7 parts of your firm, there are 5 questions for every part. And it just kind of tells you where you're strong and where you're not. And you can actually find that on our website.
And what is your website?
You can actually find it on my book website, which is exitontopbook.com.
Awesome. Okay. So there are different ways to go about fixing those different parts of a law firm, and they are dependent on what attorney skills are, who they are as a person, and what makes their team. Brooke, talk to us a little bit more about that.
So I think the first thing you need to do is be realistic. You as the owner don't know everything, and you can't know everything. Can you learn everything? Sure, you're a bright individual. Is it worth it for you to learn everything? Absolutely not. There are better uses of your time. So you've got to start there. Same thing with your team. Do they know everything? No. So you need to really evaluate yourself and your team. What do you guys know? And what do you not know? Where are there holes in your knowledge? And if there are holes, go find an expert for that. If you guys don't know how to do intake, go find an intake specialist. Because if they can change your intake, if they can increase your intake conversion from 30% to 80%, that's worth every penny that you pay them. If you hire a CFO and they take your profit margin from 15% to 30%, that's worth every penny. The second thing to understand is your personality and the personality of your team. So I talk about the different ways to pay down debt when I talk about this. And there are 2 main ways to pay down debt. There's what's called the snowball method, which is where you get the smallest debt and you pay that one off first. And then you're like, yeah, I won. And then you pay off the next smallest one and the next smallest one and the next smallest one. You keep having those wins and it keeps you going. Then there's the avalanche method. And in the avalanche method, you choose the project, you choose the debt with the highest interest rate. And you pay that one down first because that's the one that's actually going to have the biggest impact financially.
Mm-hmm.
What's your team like?
Mhm.
Do they need to have a series of wins? Or can they work on that one long project that really is going to have the biggest impact? You've got to learn that, and you have to learn what it is for you. And let me tell you, it's rarely the same for you as it is for your team.
Aside from your recently released book, there's another interesting fact about Cathedral Capital, your company, and that is, the value and cash flow of a case the day it comes in. This allows your team to accurately predict cash flow. Can you talk about this for a moment?
Yeah, as a CFO, we're really data driven. So we seek to understand our clients' cases. Um, how many people does it take to work? How many hours? How long does it stay in each stage of a case? Yeah, how long does it take from start to finish? How many times will the case pay out over the life of a case? Because Laura, some cases pay out multiple times.
Mhm.
So once we understand it, once we really know everything about that case, we also start to learn things like what percentage of cases get settled, what percentage of cases go to trial, what percentage of cases get referred out, what percentage of cases get abandoned, because that happens too. Then we take all of that information and we apply it to the cases, which means that the day a case comes in, we can take all of that information, apply it to the case, and we can tell you when it's going to pay out and how it's going to perform and what's it going to do. Are we 100% accurate case by case? No. Can we predict your yearly revenue to within a few $1,000s? Absolutely. So when you know what your revenue is, when you know how it's going to play out, when you've got confidence in that, it makes it so much easier to run your law firm.
So again, this is so great. I hope this episode about navigating law firm future, how lawyers can exit on top, was informative and educational to everyone. And as promised, here's a fun pop-up question for you, Brooke. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Excellent. Let's do it. How would you describe your ideal client? What attributes or characteristics would this person possess?
Um, I mean, they're the basic ones. Their law firm tends to be doing between $2 and $50 million a year in revenue. So between usually about 3 and 30 attorneys. But more important than that, the firms we work with, the owners have hit a ceiling. They want more from their firm, but they're stuck and they don't know how to get past that. And they are willing to change what they do to get a different result. And they execute. So they actually take action.
Mhm. So, Brooke, again, that was an amazing time spent with you today. How can law firm owners find you if they're looking to add CFO or profitability strategists to their team or need a professional advice how to sell their law firm to the right person at the right time for the right price?
That's easy. Just go to cathcap.com, CATHCAP.com, and you can find us there.
Do you have a LinkedIn, Instagram, any social media resources, phone numbers, email addresses?
Absolutely. LinkedIn, cathcap.com, Facebook, cathcap.com. You can find us everywhere through that. Yeah, and if you want to find me directly, my email address is brooke@cathcap.com.
I love it. That's simple. That again was Brooke Lively, CEO and founder of Cathedral Capital, based in Fort Worth, Texas. I want to thank all for listening and watching out to our story today. For more tips and tricks on legal funding and personal injury related topics, follow me, download, like, and subscribe to It's Time for More Injury Funding podcast on several podcast platforms, including but not limited to Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, iHeart, and others worldwide. And follow More Injury Funding on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Pinterest, YouTube, Google Business Profile, and my website at moreinjuryfunding.com. That's with 2 O's. I can't wait to see you, my dear listeners and viewers, at my next upcoming episode. Tune in soon for our next guest. Until then, be well. Thank you.